Good afternoon and welcome to Creating the Security Environments Cyber-Insurers Are Demanding, a Health System CIO Media Inc. production sponsored by Medigate. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name is Anthony Guerra. I'm the editor-in-chief of Health System CIO and I'll be your moderator today. We're looking forward to your participation. You can send in your questions or comments at any time in the Q&A box and we will take those later in the program. Nice way to view the screen. Click on the top center, get it in side-by-side mode. Then you can adjust the divider to get the slides and the video boxes the size you want them. And it should say speaker view in the top right-hand corner. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time today. First, we're going to go about 35-40 minutes with our main panel discussion featuring Brian Cayer, CISO with Wellforce, Sanjeev, VP and CISO with Centura Health, and Jonathan Langer, co-founder and CEO with Medigate. So this is going to a really interesting topic, obviously very timely and lots to talk about. So let's jump right in. Brian, let's start with you. Can we get an overview of your organization and your role?
Yep. So I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for Wellforce. So Wellforce is the parent organization to multiple community hospitals, an academic medical center, and home health foundation around the Boston metro area.
All right, very good. 15, go ahead, Brian.
15,000 employees across that.
All right, very good. Sanjeev?
Hello, my name is Sanjeev. I serve as Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer for Centura Health. At Centura Health, we are on a mission to healing individuals and uplifting communities, focused on advancing the whole person care with modern solutions. Our ecosystem includes 18 hospitals in Colorado and Kansas.
Very good. Jonathan?
Hello, everyone. I'm Jonathan Langer. I'm the CEO of a company called Medigate. We provide healthcare security for healthcare organizations, primarily healthcare delivery organizations. And I'm very happy to speak about this subject today. One of the advantages that I have of being at Medigate is I get to work with a lot of healthcare systems. So kind of a bird's eye view of what everyone is going through. So excited to share some of those thoughts today and looking forward to a good conversation.
All right, very good. All right, let's start. Brian, let's start with you. Please describe your most recent experience buying cyber insurance. How was it different from past experiences? What are insurers looking for? And how have the costs changed?
Yep. So I just went through our cyber insurance renewal on August 1st. So this past year and compared to years past, it was much more extensive in what they were looking for. So early on, they started giving us a little heads up that they're going to be looking for specific areas and controls, and I could walk through those in a minute. There's kind of 12 key controls they're looking for to really ensure that those are in place. So when we went through that too, and again, previously the process for an application was, I'd say, a little more lighter weight. Right? Go, hey, here's some things. How's your program? What kind of framework do you align to? Here's the stuff. Do you have anti-malware capability? Do you have a firewall? Do you do these things? What kind of user awareness and training? And it was fairly light. Go through, and it was same thing. Reapply, reacceptance. This year it was much more detailed. I think I started getting about 300, 280 different questions that would come out and very granular. And then there would be supplemental questions to those after. And then so we had to actually put together an entire presentation about our overall security program, present it to we had, I think, almost like 36 underwriters, kind of walk it through, here's where we are. And then from there, they look at the applications themselves and have additional follow-up perspectives. So, again, typically in our previous carrier, it actually told us they weren't going to renew us because not necessarily from our program itself, but they were actually changing their plans, who they were going to cover, and their business model changed. So we had to kind of go back out to the market. And it was definitely a challenge when we hit it, especially for healthcare. I think there was several dozen organizations, both like kind of just passed by us, both from either size or the sector. So, much more of a challenge. also when we went through that process, looking at just trying to see could we get coverage. So coverage was going to go up in cost, and it was going to go up. So premium was going to so anywhere we were seeing some assessments between a 5 to 10x increase in premiums, and then also too not only premium costs but also changes in the deductibles and how they were going to insure. And then there's specific components on what they call ransomware coverage, right? If you're going to have it, some of the insurers were actually going to do a shared model. So they're going to cap, how much they're going to cover for ransomware. And also, even if you have a cyber liability coverage specific to ransomware, they're going to do some co-sharing. So if you pay out a $5 million, if you were going to pay the ransomware for $5 million, they were going to say, we'll cover half and half. You're going to have to pay up a dollar for dollar matching to what we would do. So definitely a different change. I could go through a little bit of the controls, and if you want me to just walk through it, you think it's worth it, or you want to roll it back?
I think we're going to go through that. So
Okay.
we'll definitely get to that. Let me ask you a follow-up. You mentioned that the insurer you had, they passed on you for reasons that they just were changing the types of business they wanted to work with. It wasn't sort of personal, so to speak, about your
No.
particular application. So do you think that made things more difficult for you because you were having to go find a new company to work with, as opposed to organizations that are trying to renew with their existing insurer?
Yeah, no doubt, because then now you're net new, and everybody was looking at their book of business and saying, how many healthcare organizations they want to cover, how much premium do they want to offer. Some of them, because by the time we got to the August 1st deadline, that was our time. Some of them already reached their caps, May, June time. So they weren't actually wanted to meet extended out. So that's where they said, no, we've hit our goals for the year, for the calendar year, we're good. So that changes. So it made it much more difficult to go out and find somebody who's willing to do that. And then that's when they're looking for, full capabilities. What do not plans, full, actions, validation of the controls exist today. So that was a bit of a kind of an eye opener. In past, we could say, yes, we're implementing this. Here's our plan. It's not fully done. Here's our roadmap. A lot of them would pass if you didn't have it in place as of date of insurance.
That's very interesting. It seems like there's a real incentive out there for people to stick with who they have, because
Right.
you don't want to be cut adrift at this point right now in this market looking for cyber insurance as a health system. So we'll talk more about that. Sanjeev, I know you had been through this a little while back, 6-7 months. It was not quite as painful, perhaps for one of the reasons we just identified, but tell us about your experience.
Really a good question and a great insights from Brian on this. I recently joined Centura Health within the last 12 months. So I think it would be important that I share a perspective over the last couple of years. What I saw, with help of brokerage firm working with insurer, was looking into the details of the insurance product itself from a cyber insurance perspective, which was, again, part of a larger sets of insurance package from business operations perspective. And they were diving deeper into the kind of insight Brian talked about. Have you had data breaches? What cyber crimes have you been susceptible with? What is your cyber posture currently? How are you protecting against malware or ransomware or distributed denial of service? So all of that indicated to me that the industry from a cyber insurer perspective has shifted to ask deeper questions about the type of threat landscape that the world and healthcare is facing in modern day. And so the details of those questions and responses really then translate into the type of product and then type of cost an organization can expect in terms of insurance coverage. And second element to that, if you have been and we've been party to insurance coverage from the same provider for, let's say, a couple of years to many years, the outcome can be different potentially than if you are a new a new player seeking insurance coverage in the same market. And so that's the experience that we felt. It wasn't as aggressive as Brian highlighted. Nevertheless, it required detailed analysis for us to reach our conclusions.
Very good. Jonathan, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? I know you speak with lots of health systems. What are you hearing on this front?
So great insights, both from Sanjeev and Brian. I'm kind of in line with what I am hearing, and maybe giving us some goalposts into what you can expect from more rigid to a little bit less rigid. A couple things without repeating too many of the previous comments. One, obviously costs are up. So Brian hit on that point. I'm seeing that really across the board, and it makes sense given the threat landscape and what we're seeing in the industry. So that is definitely something that we're seeing a lot of. I think maybe even worse, and again, this is something that Brian said earlier, some are not even getting the cyber insurance, which is the most concerning, or having to work through several underwriters in order to get finally an approved cyber insurance policy. So that definitely is something that I've been hearing a lot lately or this year. And lastly, and I think this is also something that we should draw attention to, is the onerous process that is required in order to actually get a cyber insurance. So many organizations, especially on the smaller side, don't necessarily have the staff or the bandwidth to actually go through all this pretty rigorous documentation. And that is something it creates some time constraints and pressure that I think folks should be aware of. Lastly, I just say that it's a new insight for me what Sanjeev said right now, which is great about thinking about renewing old insurance versus getting into a new insurer, and how that might be a point of risk in terms of starting a new process, which can be onerous. So that's I think that's a helpful insight as we proceed with the discussion.
You know, Jonathan, it may be a little early in the process, but it sounds like this could be an impetus for health systems to go shopping for products and services like those you offer. Have you seen or felt that yet? That people are calling you up and saying, "I got to get my house in order. I got to buy some insurance, and I need to get things straightened out." So, have you seen that yet?
I'll say this. I think it's what I'm seeing from a healthcare security vendor perspective is a confluence of several things that are coming together. The recent cyber attacks on healthcare and the infamous ransomware attacks that happened last year, that has certainly called attention. Insurance and what's happening in the insurance world and compensating controls that might help actually get insurance. We've been hearing a little bit of that as well. And also just I think that everything that's happening with digital transformation right now in healthcare, kind of post-COVID, to me, that would be the strongest trend that we're feeling as well. Now, when I couple all of these together, certainly it's making an impact on the healthcare security domain in general. And I think kind of for every organization out there, every one of the factors that I mentioned, the weighting of it in terms of their decision making may be a little bit different. But that's kind of an overview of what I'm seeing.
Yeah, Jonathan, I couldn't agree more with you. You know, really, when you think about the digital economy, right, business and technology innovations are really driving growth, innovation, and even cost optimization. But they do represent a heightened level of cyber risk. You know, when you think about new products and innovative solutions, they probably haven't matured from a cybersecurity posture perspective. So as they are most likely to introduce potentially new vulnerabilities, they're probably even susceptible to new attacks. Having said all that, you know, cyber breaches are likely to happen given the complexity of the world that we operate in and digital economy that we operate in. And we all know from examples that we've seen in the industry, it can be extremely harmful. We've noted examples where hospitals have faced a scenario where they're having to divert patients to other hospitals or having to work on paper. So all of these translate into tangible costs, brand challenges, and potential changes in consumers' behavior. But even more importantly, when we think about the mission that we have in serving and caring for our patients and families, and so that's what's at risk. And cyber insurance is just one risk mitigation measure, and we shouldn't think of that as necessarily silver bullet for all challenges relating to cyber risk.
Yeah, well, you made the point about making the decision to divert patients. It just came to mind that there's a lawsuit. There was a baby that died. This was reported in the Wall Street Journal recently about a ransomware attack on a hospital, and they're being sued essentially in a sense because they did not divert patients, because they continued to care and accept patients, but perhaps not communicate that they were somewhat diminished. That's at least what the lawsuit alleges. So, in that whole decision of whether or not and at what point to divert, and then what to do with your existing patients, these are all things that are evolving as we speak. So very interesting stuff. Brian, let's go to you. I think you were going to touch on these points before.
Yeah.
How can CISOs prepare their organizations to buy cyber insurance or to renew? What security policies, procedures, and tools should they have in place? So you mentioned going before all these underwriters and making a presentation. At some point, do you get some sort of document? I don't know if it's like doing a dissertation where then you're questioned and then you get some sort of document back with bullet points of things you need to do. Essentially, it's like, I don't know if it's free or you have to pay for this part. It's like a free gap analysis that you might pay a consultant to do, say, where do I need to improve? But tell me your thoughts about any feedback you got through the process and what you think people need to put in place to be ready for this process.
Yep. So they early on, so we worked with our brokerage firm to go through, and they said these are what there's 12, we'll call kind of 12 key controls. But really, it's a lot of it mitigation of ransomware. So they gave us that up ahead and say, kind of walk us through what are your programs around that. So these are the things. So I'll walk you through a little bit. So again, manage vulnerabilities. So regularly, again, scanning, penetration testing, understanding, addressing vulnerabilities, patching systems and applications. So a lot of this are kind of foundational, standardized stuff. But again, how well you're doing, they want to see that too, metrics and reporting how well you're doing. Logged and monitored networks, right? So are you, what kind of, logging and monitoring do you have? Do you, again, security operations centers as well. Phishing becoming a big issue, is usually one of the primary attack vectors. So how well are you filtering emails and web content? So, do you have what are the tools and technologies in place? MFA controlled access. So again, insurance for MFA for all external access, but also too is again, then protected privilege accounts. So this is where they go back through an insurance of also MFA, access in on-prem, off-prem, how do you manage it? So, they don't specifically go into like, a full privilege access management program, but you really start to have to develop one. Like, how well are you doing that? How well do you have privilege? Do you have 2FA in place for all? So that was actually one of the things, this is one of the key areas. Do you have 2FA in place for all privileged access functions? So this was kind of a challenge when you say that. It's like, so the answer was, how do you answer that? Yes to all, right? And so could we define what, and then that was a big thing. How could you, let's define privilege, right? So do we look at it in all aspects? So going there, so that was one area I think that's going to be a key aspect for a lot of organizations to define and build out. Protected networks, right? So, firewall processes, secured endpoints. So ensuring that you have those phishing aware workforce, hardened device configuration, and then prepared and tested incident response plans and secure and tested backups. So those are the things. So big key areas. I'm going to tell you that of those kind of, I think if I look at that stack and where they kind of really focused on is, you can't always assume like your defensive posture is going to protect you, right? Because there's always inevitabilities, something, either new device connected, new vulnerabilities, 0 days exploits. So those are there. So it's coming back down to, do you have a segmented network? Do you have good IR, response plans, incident response and readiness plans? And how are your backups and recovery process? Are they ear gapped? Are they encrypted? How protected are they? I mean, do you have, again, management around, MFA for access, what accounts are being used, how often, how are you managing those accounts? Do you then test and recover? What are your test and recovery exercises and validation of those? Not just saying, yes, we do recovery exercises. Everybody will say, yeah, we always have ad hoc system outages, something here, not necessarily cyber related, but just something goes on and we restore. But those aren't, those are tested processes, but not, validated, saying, do we have larger scale recovery? And that's when large scale attacks, ransomware come back, people go back and say, could we recover? What's our recovery process? And they're finding out sometimes at the time that they're not, their backup and recovery procedures weren't as strong as they found. So those are the kind of, I think those key three, those are the kind of three key areas I would say, focused on that, because the other loans are a lot more, I look at it, those are kind of foundational. These are the next kind of tier that organizations have a challenge to come in. Prior to my role in as Wellforce CISO, I was doing security consulting. So I've seen, did a lot of security assessments for organizations. So I've seen where they kind of fell in relative capabilities. So those are the things that I always see people, organization never really get to is, hardening that process, testing that out, building those, and then really privilege. Because there was even a situation with one other healthcare organization who actually had a ransomware attack and they actually attacked the backups. And what they did is they were actually go in and set the clock drive on and so they had a process that is, let's store your backups for 90 days. What they did is turn the clock on and set it 90 days in advance. So basically destroyed eliminated all their backups. So when they went to go and restore, they had no restoration point. So those are the things that they're looking for. And the cyber carriers are aware because they're paying for these, these outages. And so they're saying, well, how, they're learning from it too and saying, how should everyone else build in and protect? So, really, those are the kind of the key areas I think I would, have organizations focus on if they haven't. So I'll
just a quick follow-up there. I mean, other than checking off, yeah, we do this on a survey of some sort. I mean, to what degree do you have to prove that you do these things? To what degree do they check?
So that this past year wasn't so much as a check, other than, do you have metrics? Do you have visibility? How are you reporting it? How are you sharing this up to your board and kind of bringing that visibility? And so I'm prepping myself that they're going to actually look for that other validation. So this is where we're going to, in my own head, so I want to get third-party validation as well. Here's what we're doing. Here's the control aspect we have. Not just take our word for it, but also get a third-party assessor to come in and says, we validate these controls, because I have a feeling that is what they're going to look at next year. So this is just kind of this year is kind of, I envision as more that precursor. How do we start doing it? They haven't established that process themselves because they're kind of evolving as their need, right? Because they're trying to adjust to this crisis, right? I've seen something like 330% increase in paid out premiums by healthcare the insurance providers over the last year. So they're trying to figure out that, and I think they're going to ask for those things going forward. So not just, a self-attestation says, yes, I have this in process, but a controlled test and validation from a third party that says, we have tested this as part of that. And I have a feeling that it's going to be my go ahead for next year to get the renewal.
And it may be the kind of thing where if you, I think they do this with health insurance. If you lie on an application and something happens and they say, oh, you said you had this in place, but you didn't, and that's why you were breached, we're not paying, right? I
Right.
mean, that's simply
And
how that'll go.
yeah, that is also in other key aspects. So the way I look at it is being, honest as much as you can with them, because as you should be, because you have to, they're your, the cyber carriers are really kind of that partner. So you can't, my perspective is be very upfront where we are. It may affect how your premiums, but you're not protected if you don't share that information, because if they come back and say, well, how did this occur? You said you had, best in class, and then you go, well, we didn't have that environment covered. Well, that wasn't disclosed, then therefore they're not going to pay. So you're really best to be just upfront on what you have and understand those, and then, work to control those, those gaps.
Sanjeev, what are your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, Brian, you masterfully walked our audience and us through the detail of, what it means to be cybersecurity prepared, right? Insurance premium is directly proportional to cybersecurity preparedness, and there's no question about it. That's what the leading questions from insurance help them evaluate, what is the posture of given organization, and then how does that translate into premium. Beyond that, right? To help us prepare our organizations, really, the approach that I have taken, and not just at Centura Health, but all organizations that I've had an opportunity to serve, is that cyber insurance product is designed to help us hedge against cyber risks. That is the job of the insurance coverage, but it should not be treated as a risk transfer mechanism. It's only an element of risk management. Given that, to Brian's point, being prepared with security critical controls and effectiveness, and I won't repeat Brian because he walked us through many of those controls and how you measure effectiveness, is how you then apply the other elements of risk management from a cyber perspective. So let's just take that malware example or ransomware example that we just talked about. Well, we should have safeguard in place that even a third party can evaluate it to be, one, it is present, and second, is effective against known threats, and layered defense approaches that we employ goes to then provide for a protection from a cybersecurity threats perspective. As I acknowledged earlier, players or cyber criminals out there are motivated. They have multiple techniques. They're looking to take advantage of any gap an organization may have. And so my view is that being prepared with cybersecurity controls, being effective, is the ultimate first measure, and insurance coverage is an element to manage that cyber risk.
Very good. Jonathan, your thoughts?
I guess I'll just continue with Sanjeev's last comment, and I totally agree that ultimately this is part of the risk management construct, the way that we look at insurance. And if we look at it in that lens, then basically what the underwriters are trying to do is it's a risk assessment exercise is really what it is, just a really long one right now. In that sense, what I'm seeing with the HDOs that we're working with, kind of going back to Brian's 12 tenets of security that they were looking at, is really to start with the basics and to map out the prime security components, whether it's the list of the 12, or I'm sure that with different underwriters or with different insurers, it looks a little bit different. But generally speaking, sticking to the basics and delineating what that means for them. The other part, which is again interesting, the way that Brian went through this, is I think it's not just saying that you have these things, but really good documentation. And going back to the onerous process, I guess this is part of it. You got to have really, really good documentation, whether it's incident response, disaster recovery, all the policies that you have in place. This is really the time to brush up and make sure that those documents are readily available because they're going to ask for them, and rightfully so. And then maybe last piece of advice that I could give, I do agree again that they're going to ask for some sort of validation about you actually performing this process. So one thing that helps is just to show um, minutes of meetings from monthly security reviews that you have, revisions of the documentation, just to show that you're constantly upgrading and improving the processes, and it's like a living process rather than something that is a bit stale. I think that, as well as, of course, third-party validation that Brian had mentioned, I think those are all going to be really key to making the argument that you are actually doing all these. Um, Lastly, with regard to tools, the way that I would think about tools is just as a means of supporting the fact that you're adhering to the processes that you have in place. So let's say we're talking about vulnerability management. I would look at the vulnerability management program. I would delineate all the parts of it, the workflows, how it works, the SLAs, and so on, and then say, hey, it's supported by automation that looks like this, because that gives it more credibility and more like really more legs in that regard. But the way the tool comes at the end, not at the beginning, the way that I would methodically approach this.
Very good. Good
Jonathan,
advice. Go ahead.
if I may add,
Please.
I think that it's worth, I think, emphasizing and highlighting that a third-party validation and successful certification of some type that's potentially offered by HITRUST, Common Security Framework from HITRUST, or SaaS validation, I think they go a long way to
Definitely.
prove all of what Brian and Jonathan, you have described in terms of specific controls, their monitoring and operation, and then also how effective are you with those controls. And again, we can go and explain all of that, which is what these third-party validation goes ahead and does it on your behalf. And I think it's not easy to always achieve, but to the extent that we can demonstrate that, I think it's extremely helpful, even from a cyber insurance perspective.
I agreed 100%. 100%.
Brian, I think that probably some folks out there listening, who will be listening, are nervous. If you're a good CISO and you run a pretty tight ship, should you be nervous about this process? Let's say cost is out of your control, right? You can't handle what they're going to charge you, the premium or the deductible. Those may be ridiculous and through the roof. If you are a CISO that's good at what you do and you've been up on things, is this something that should still make you nervous? Was anything about this, in your opinion, unreasonable from an expectation or reporting point of view?
No, if you have a good program walking it through, it's not unreasonable asks that they're going through. Some things that, to be honest, is what you should be doing as part of a ongoing process up to your executive leaders and boards, right? To make sure, are you doing enough? Here's where it's going. So I think to me, it was just another opportunity to share to this community. The reality though is, but you do have to make sure premiums will go up, right? Even if you have that, because again, it's just that cost that's going across everyone, right? It's going to have an increase when the number of payouts is being, exceedingly high, and this from the cyber carriers are going to have to transfer that cost back down. So just be prepared for that. So I don't, and again, if you have a good carrier and you have a good program, like your renewal should be, not as, difficult, but you're probably going to still see some premium increase regardless of what that, what you've done in past, because I think they're starting to, like, again, that's always going to be setting the bar ahead, right? Mm-hmm. This is the thing that we expect the it's going to be one of those constant change of goalpost movements that you're going to see going forward. So, but a good CISO is always aware, because security is never a point in time. It's continuous, right? It's a continuous evolution. It's never it's always understanding the next level of threat landscape, where you're going, and building that out. So if you're a good CISO doing that ahead, I think you'll have a okay experience with it. I wouldn't say I wouldn't say it will be easy, but it'll be easier than if you're not prepared.
Right. Well, let's stick with that for a minute. Even if, let's say you have this coming up a few months down the road, you think you're in pretty good shape, you'll be able to get through it. You still want to give your C-suite a heads up about what you anticipate to be cost increases, and God forbid, if there's any reason that or have been notified that your current insurer is not going to be able to take care of you. Now, I think that's a definite, you're in one boat or the other boat. If you're renewing with your existing insurer, okay, it may not be fun, but if you run a tight ship, you'll get through it. You still want to give a heads up probably about the cost that's going to be coming down the pike. If you're not going to your existing carrier, then you're in a whole nother boat, and it's maybe a difficult process, but take that where you will.
Yeah, no, I think so. That's what I was saying. So increasing costs and premiums, but also too is it's also letting them know is, as you're going through this, maybe you need to really upgrade some of the capabilities, some of the technology you have. So they're also been looking for best in class capabilities, right? So it's not just a technology stack, it's also people and process, right? So going through that piece, and there's a cost to that. So, hey, we're okay here. We're probably going to get challenged in these things. We need to maybe make some investments into this process, right? So we need that, kind of executive level buy-in. It's going to happen, right? And we need to go through that. If not, we're going to pay a premium either way. So how do we want to combat that? And the reality too is premiums, maybe that's the other aspect that they go in is that we'll call the deductible. What are they going to cover as your base deductible? That's is going up, right? Those are going up as well. So you may not be able to affect the premium, but you could also maybe, work that deductible. But they're going to look for that shared cost model too, is what you got to start explaining. So, what do we do? Because some of them are going to say, well, do we need this cyber coverage, right? Because could we do everything here? I also go back and say, well, there's still at risk. Obviously, we don't see ransomware being addressed globally for probably years, right? So we're going to see this as a systemic issue that we're going to have to come up with. But, I don't know. I think that we have to go back and say, I don't have a Bitcoin wallet that we're going to be able to do this and put money in. So our cyber insurance partners have that, and they're able to kind of facilitate that activity should we have to, for some reason, pay because maybe we, nuisance or something that we didn't have the right backup process in place. So, recovery from, getting the keys is maybe the only option we have in some situations. So we want to kind of be prepared for that and giving them where, here's our current capabilities, here's where we are, here's where they're going to be probably we look to challenge. So even if you've been doing good, you want to also give an opportunity to bring to the board to how could we do better, right? Because it's going to continue to evolve and needing to do better.
It's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about that just technically facilitating a ransomware payment, it might be nice to have that insurance company to help you. Although I don't know if you can hire, I think I've heard of these one-off companies that you can hire to just do that. But like you said, it might be nice to have that partner in your corner to help you through this.
Yep.
So Sanjeev, go ahead, Brian. Go ahead real quick.
No.
Go to Sanjeev.
No, great. So that's, I would concur. Yep.
All right. Sanjeev, your thoughts?
Anthony, I think the cost, the comment about premium and how do you prepare your board about cyber insurance and your executives and the importance of it. It goes back to risk management, right? Our boards and executives have been quite aware of managing business risks for a very long time. And technology and cyber risk may be the newest form of risk management on their plate. So when talking about cyber risk in a way that really resonates and makes sense from the effect of cyber risk in terms of cost, brand reputation, service operation, disruption to operation. When you think about it from that perspective and convey the message in that particular way, I have found our executive and board audience highly receptive to the conversation. Well, in terms of then how do you look at cost components and to what extent to have the coverage, I think that a couple of different elements go into that. Well, businesses are growing or expanding, right? So market growth opportunities. For example, Centura changes the landscape in terms of where we operate and how we operate. And that goes hand in hand with the market conditions in terms of cyber threat landscape. Well, cyber threat landscape has significantly evolved, and we as an organization and the industry, healthcare, has been very susceptible to it. And so the combination of those factors, just like it would be for any insurance product, like our automotive, likely to see increase in premium. But how you really address that particular element with the type of coverage you have is just like being a good driver or having good safety measures on your car. Do we have cyber posture that makes sense from an insurance perspective? And really, that's the type of conversation we have with our leaders in saying, as we improve and enhance the cyber preparedness, better off we will be as an organization from a insurance coverage, and then how we leverage the coverage if we ever had to, given the landscape that we operate in. So I think those are the important elements in how executive leaders and board leaders really like to hear about cyber risk. And then as management team, it's our duty and responsibility to work through the details in how you then get the organization prepared from a cybersecurity perspective.
Very good. Jonathan, you know what I think the real issue here, the real issue here to me seems the fast jump in expectations. That's where the rub comes in, right? We know how to present risk. We know how to make asks to our CEOs. We understand that, how that goes. The question is, has there been an abrupt increase in the expectations of the cyber insurers that does not have time for the average health system to close before it's time to buy insurance? Meaning, I show up, hey, I'll have my insurance, and they go, whoa, you need to be doing A, B, C, D. Now I asked Brian, and he said no. He said that's not unreasonable what they're asking for, but I did say for a good CISO, for maybe an above average CISO. So I'm wondering let's talk about the average health system. When we talk about for the average health system, are they likely missing one or two of the important pieces that are going to be expected to get insurance? Now, that's the question.
I mean, I think you, Anthony, you hit the nail on the head in saying that it's really about aligning expectations. And it looks like this year expectations have changed a little bit with regard to what healthcare systems need to do. In my opinion, based on what I'm seeing, with regard to the C-level, it's about setting expectations ahead of time. It's always about not surprising people. People have the tendency not to like to be surprised.
Yes.
And giving them a heads up that this is going to be a little bit more rigorous this year, and more importantly, it's going to cost more. And they should just know that ahead of time and not kind of bring that up at the meeting itself and let it take its course, because then people will be surprised. I think, and going back, Anthony, to what you were saying about how different organizations operate, I think it's also about setting expectations internally within the security organizations about what's ahead. So Brian was obviously very well prepared, and even though the process was onerous, things were in good shape based on the answer that Brian just gave. In other cases, you're going to have to brush up the security program. You're going to have to brush up documentation. You're going to have to brush up some of these processes, and that just takes time. So that's resources that you're going to have to devote in order to actually, or to allocate in order to get through all this. Now, if you know this ahead of time and you're setting internal expectations that there's going to be a workload dedicated to this, then that's one thing. But if you remember, 2 weeks before you engage, then it's a different story.
Well,
And yeah, so that would be, I think, like the most tangible recommendation that I could give is just think about it ahead of time, because it's different than what it was in the past when it was kind of just a check in the box and you would pay and it was like a regular process. Things have changed a little now.
well, I mean, I feel like we're being very helpful to the industry for those that choose to listen to this webinar or the recording of it, which is, uh, Brian, I would think, they should, the CISOs who hear this should, right away put in a meeting request with their CEO and say, hey, we have to talk about some things. There's a few things there's two pieces that I know we need to put in place that I've been asking for, and we need to do it. I'm getting pushback from users or whatever. And we need to put these things in place because we're going to have to go for insurance renewal in 3 months. So we need to get these things in place. And oh, by the way, this is going to cost money. The insurance is going to cost more money, and the deductible is going to cost more money. Just a heads up. We said nobody likes to be surprised. That's the thing that gets executives the most annoyed with those who report to them, is when they get surprised. So would that be your advice? Hey, if you're a CISO, look at these 12 things. I don't know if we can get that list from you, but it was requested. Look at these 12 things, find your gaps, get prepared, and communicate with your C-suite and board so they don't get surprised. Your thoughts?
Yep, I'll put it in here too. And I'll put I think I just sent it on, the 12 controls in the chat. And I agree. I think that the big, couple things kind of to look at too is, I think this is actually helps. I think that, at the end, it's going to actually help healthcare to get up to the standards that it needs to. So I think there's been a little bit of an avoidance of that need and really supporting that into healthcare as a sector, right? I think this is the reason why we're seeing increase in ransomware and targets at that, because their need to operate 24/7, their need to do this, but they didn't spend the money to support a lot of, again, it's all budget based, right? So where do they, where's that risk? Do they need to spend it? Could we defer it to with the cyber coverage? So this is going to help, I think, change the landscape a little bit in the long term. It's going to be some pain points in the interim, right? So the other thing too is, when we talked about, Anthony, is have that conversation, CISOs having that conversation with C-suite. The other thing I see though is there's still, you see there's reporting that many of the smaller healthcare organizations don't even have a CISO. So security department may be just like a one person who's doing security administrative access and does lower stuff. So those are the ones that are going to have those challenges, right? And that's the concern that they have. They may not even really know that they're not prepared. And then how do they work that through? What are their options, right? How do they, what is their go forward basis to do that? So those are going to be the ones there. But I think fundamentally, and that, and then hopefully in the next, it's going to take some time, but the next few years, we will, as an industry, will be much more prepared. Internally, it's kind of right now, I think it throws a little bit of challenge, right? So everybody's in a demand. Hey, what do we need to do? Gain it. So it's resource constraints, especially on technology and cybersecurity individuals. Right? If you had to go out and hire anyone right now, it's not an easy task to try to find qualified resources. I think everybody's trying to say, what do we need to do to bring people in? So like I said, it's going to be a little bit of a, bumpy road for the next year, 2 years, I think, for the industry. But I think in the end, it'll be a much better position.
Well, makes me nervous, and I'm not even in the market to buy cyber insurance. But Sanjeev, I'm nervous. What are your final thoughts for today? For final advice I want you to picture a CISO at a community hospital that's they don't have every single piece in place. And again, they've been trying, but they don't have every single piece in place. And these organizations may not even be able to afford the price increases. Let's say somehow they qualify for it. They may not even be able to afford the price increases. I don't know what they do. I don't know what's going to happen. I know some people are going to get dropped. You've got good organizations barely getting to the insurance that they're asking for at incredible price increases. Your final advice for your colleagues.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to participate in the conversation. Great advice already from colleagues Brian and Jonathan. I think what I would recommend and suggest is looking at cyber risk and then insurance being an element of how you address cyber risk. So first, let's focus on ensuring that the basic safeguards and controls, as well as controls that help against threats in modern day, are in place and are effective. I think that is first and foremost. Then look at cyber insurance as a measure to hedge against the risk that we talked about throughout the hour, and you get a better opportunity and coverage if the security posture is better, right? So insurance shouldn't be thought of as the first stopgap or transferring of risk, because that is not going to be a value proposition that one should try to afford or can afford. And so really that my advice is as simple as that, is just focus on security measures and complement with cyber insurance to give the organization the best opportunity to protect against cyber risk.
All right, Jonathan, I think we're going to give you the last word. Again, I'm stressed. I'm nervous. Make me feel better.
Anthony, please don't.
First, I would keep calm, but
Okay.
keep calm. But I'll tell you what, I'm just kind of packaging really all the helpful insights that we had today. I really like what Sanjeev said about the way to think about this. Insurance is not it's not a silver bullet. It's just a component of the overall risk management program, and therefore, as we said earlier, security is continuous, and the building blocks of the security program should be built throughout the entire year or the entire roadmap for the organization. It's not a substitute to having a really good, sound security program, regardless. And then the other more, I guess, tangible advice is just to begin the preparation a couple months earlier than what you would have thought of in the last year, in the last couple of years. And bringing all of those two together, kind of coming to this with a high level of preparedness, no reason to be nervous. That would be my advice here.
And communicate, right? Communicate now. Tell everyone what you're hearing and what's coming.
Exactly. To the C-suite and to your own people.
Yep. Very good. Wow, that was excellent. Regarding continuing education, you can use the final slide in this deck. You'll get an email when the on-demand recording is ready for viewing, and I have a feeling this one is going to be very active. This archive is going to be listened to. If you want to sponsor an event with us, you can reach out to Nancy Wilcox from our team, and you can go to our website to register for upcoming webinars. With that, I want to thank our panel, Brian Cayer, Sanjeev Shah, and Jonathan Langer. And I want to thank Medigate very much for sponsoring today, and you, our attendees. And with that, everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.